Hi there, folks. Today, of course, we're in Toronto. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here in Ontario. For a long time, people in Ontario have felt the impacts of decisions that were made by governments that helped those at the very top, made life easier for the wealthy, and made life harder for everyone else. People in Ontario remember when Ms. Wynne, Premier Wynne at the time, promised not to sell off public assets, then sold off Hydro One, which surely benefited people on Bay Street, but made life a lot harder for families as hydro bills went up. And now with Mr. Ford as Premier, he's making life even harder for people. He's slashing and painfully cutting the services that families need. We see the impacts directly on students in classrooms with a cut of 10,000 teachers and education workers. We're seeing cuts to housing with $160 million less funding for housing, for affordable housing particularly. We're seeing cuts to healthcare, to funding for autistic kids. This has been painful and difficult. Now, Mr. Trudeau, when asked the question what he would do, he surely said a lot against Mr. Ford, but when pushed on this at the Toronto Star editorial meeting, he said, I wouldn't do anything to change the decision made by a politician or a premier who's making choices to hurt families. You know, I'm not going to interfere. He either doesn't think it's his job to do anything to stand up for people. I believe we don't give up on anyone. We never give up on people. He was pushed on the fact that his national housing plan resulted in a loophole that Mr. Ford drove a bulldozer through and cut $160 million. And again, he had nothing really to respond to that, to deal with that. In fact, his housing plan is 19% less per GDP than what Mr. Harper spent. So he is not responding to the struggles that people are facing here in Ontario. People are hurting because of cuts to healthcare, to education. They can't find housing, and Mr. Trudeau is nowhere to be seen. And Mr. Scheer is certainly not going to make things better. He's in fact probably going to make things worse. And so Mr. Trudeau is not helping and just sitting back and saying the words, nice words, but no action. Mr. Scheer is probably going to make things worse. What people need to know is they do not have to settle for less. As Mr. Trudeau keeps on telling people, you've got to settle for less. He's going to scare people into voting for Trudeau, voting for Liberals instead of Conservatives. I want to say to people, you do not have to settle for less. You can settle for, you don't have to settle. You can actually build a better future where we invest in housing, we invest in healthcare, we expand to include dental care and pharmacare for all. We can make a brighter future possible. We've got the ability, if we make the right choices, we can do it. I'm confident and excited that people can see in New Democrats a real option to take on the powerful and the wealthy and make life better for everyone else. We're not in it for the rich. I don't work for the powerful. I work for people. I want to make their lives better. Donc ici en Ontario, on a vu les coupures des gouvernements ici en Ontario, les libéraux et les conservateurs qui ont aidé beaucoup les plus riches, mais ils ont rendu la vie plus difficile pour monsieur et madame tout le monde. Et avec Madame Wynne, quand elle était Première ministre, elle a dit qu'elle ne va jamais vendre le système d'électricité, mais l'a vendu. Maintenant, avec Premier ministre Ford, il coupe des services en santé, l'éducation, et ce sont des coupures qui font mal pour les gens. Et M. Trudeau, qu'est-ce qu'il dit? Il donne des belles paroles, et sans des actions concrètes. Il a donné une grande prêche pour le financement de logements. À cause de cette prêche, M. Ford a coupé beaucoup de financements pour le logement abordable. Donc, la réalité c'est M. Scheer va faire pire. Mais dans cette élection, ce n'est pas un choix entre des libéraux qui vont faire rien, et qui vont donner des belles promesses, mais sans des actions concrètes, ou les conservateurs qui vont continuer de couper. On a une autre option d'un gouvernement qui va travailler pour vous, qui va se battre pour vous. Et ça, c'est les néo-démocrates. On est là pour investir dans les soins de santé, pour investir dans le logement abordable, pour rendre la vie plus facile pour les gens, pas pour les plus riches. Merci. Questions? Yes? We got it. My man's going to call it out right here. But everyone's going to have a question.
Okay, yeah, the first question is, do you agree with the Quebec court decision that people with painful and curable diseases are not terminally ill should be granted this assistance? Like, do you think the law can be changed to reflect that?
Yes, I do. I looked at that decision, and the court ruling was that the current criteria are too restricted and too limited. And I believe that that's correct. People should have the ability to make a very difficult choice, but a very important choice. And to die with dignity is an important choice that people should be able to make. And there needs to be criteria that reflect the importance of this decision. Given that court decision, there is certainly a lot of concerns around the restrictions and the limitations on access to this decision, and I want to ensure that people are able to make that choice. But there's protections in place for the vulnerable, but absolutely I think that given that court decision and given a lot of concerns I've heard, we definitely need to look at limiting or removing some of the restrictions. Oui, donc après la décision du cours de justice au Québec concernant le droit de mourir dans la dignité, ils ont trouvé que les critères sont trop limités. Je suis d'accord et je pense qu'il faut régler ce problème des critères trop limités pour donner vraiment le choix aux gens qui veulent prendre cette décision difficile de mourir dans la dignité. You know, for me, I mean, it's something that I've faced my whole life, so it's not something that I'm surprised by. In that case, I think the guy was trying to be friendly, but you know, that's a thing with when people say mean things, that they don't always intend for it to be mean, but it's hurtful, and a lot of Canadians face that all the time. Casual comments that demean people because of their gender, their sexuality, the color of their skin, their spiritual beliefs. That happens all too often. And I want to send a clear message to Canadians who've been told to change who they are just to fit in or to get ahead. I want people to be who they are, to believe in yourself, to love yourself, and to celebrate who you are, because everyone should belong, and I want to build a world where everyone belongs. Oui, en fait, j'ai fait face à des choses comme ça, ce qui s'est passé hier à Montréal toute ma vie. Donc pour moi, c'est quelque chose qui est rendu un peu normal, mais je sais que c'est tellement difficile pour plusieurs personnes qui toujours recevoir des conseils qui disent que vous devez changer pour être partie de la société, ou vous devez changer votre identité pour avancer dans votre carrière. C'est ce qui se passe pour les gens à cause de leur genre, de leur sexualité, la couleur de leur identité. Et donc, ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'il faut célébrer votre identité. Il faut célébrer qui vous êtes. Et je vais bâtir une société où tout le monde peut être qui ils ou elles sont et réussir dans la vie et avancer dans leur carrière. Donc je veux bâtir cette société et avec l'aide de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, j'ai confiance qu'on peut le faire. Well, I mean, it kind of speaks to the weakness of someone's argument if they're trying to appeal to have people vote for them based on the way they look. We're in 2019. I hope people aren't going to vote based on the way someone looks, but they're going to vote for someone based on what they believe in, what they care about, and how they're going to make your life better. I think that the notion that people should vote on what you look like, it has no place in 2019. I hope it doesn't, at least. And I am hoping that people vote based on what's going to benefit the planet, what's going to benefit their kids, what's going to benefit their lives, and a government that's not going to make choices that benefit those at the very top, as we've seen liberals and conservatives do, but choose a government that's going to make choices that benefit people, that put people first and put people at the heart of every decision they make.
Speaking of the planet, there was a spat last night in the debate between the conservatives and the liberals over
right? So what about your campaign? Have you purchased carbon offsets for your plane? What measures are you taking in your campaign to reduce the impact on the environment and climate?
Well, we're trying to be very careful with that. It's very important to me not to create more of a carbon footprint than we can, and so we've made decisions like staying in one place for longer. We didn't fly back to Montreal when we could have to be at the climate crisis, thinking that flying across Canada to join a climate rally in Montreal wouldn't be the best way to show that we support fighting against the climate crisis. So we've been making very prudent decisions around the way we move around the country, and we are absolutely committed to buying carbon offsets. That's a part of our commitment. We want to make sure that our commitments are in line with our.
You haven't done this.
Pardon me?
Bought the carbon offsets yet?
I can give you the details on that, but it's a commitment that we made.
Pourquoi avez-vous été ignoré par les autres chefs de parti, en fait?
Comment?
Pourquoi avez-vous été ignoré par les autres chefs de parti, en fait?
Je n'étais pas ignoré.
Développer là-dessus, non?
Non, mais je n'étais pas ignoré. J'ai parlé avec tous les chefs. On a eu des face-à-face, donc je n'étais pas ignoré. Je pense que c'est impossible d'être ignoré pendant des face-à-face parce que c'était des face-à-face.
Les gens, les autres chefs de parti ne semblent pas avoir beaucoup de choses à reprocher à votre plateforme, critiquer peu les positions que vous avez prises dans les dernières semaines. Qu'est-ce que ça dit sur votre campagne?
C'est difficile de critiquer un plan qui est un plan audacieux et excellent. Donc, je pense que c'est difficile d'avoir des critiques sur notre plan parce que c'est un plan qui aide le monde, qui aide les gens. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi il ne peut pas critiquer notre plan.
Et Andrew Scheer a dit ce matin être pro-vie. Reconnaissez-vous au moins qu'il a fait preuve d'honnêteté aujourd'hui?
Je n'ai pas entendu la question.
Andrew Scheer a dit ce matin être pro-vie. Est-ce que vous reconnaissez au moins qu'il est honnête sur sa question?
Il a eu la chance de le dire, mais il n'a pas le dit. Et il a dit maintenant, après le débat, donc ça montre qu'il manque le courage de le dire pendant un débat, après une question tellement directe. Donc oui, ça montre un manque de courage. Yes, the question was about Mr. Scheer asking, you heard the question, I'm assuming? Yeah, and so I think the fact that he said it today, but he didn't say it during a debate when asked the question directly certainly shows a lack of courage. So there are provisions. They're just simply completely unenforceable. That's my problem. Not the fact that they don't exist. They're certainly there. There are provisions, but what's the point of having provisions on labor rights, having provisions on the environment when there's no enforceability? That's to me meaningless. That means that they're just lip service, which is exactly what Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal government have been doing, is saying a lot of nice things. I don't deny that they say nice things. I don't deny that there's nice words, but if those words aren't enforceable, what benefit does that have to the environment? What benefit does that have to workers? I would ensure that if we put protections in place, they should be enforceable. Otherwise, what is the point of just simply having pretty words? That is exactly my criticism of this government. The fact that Ms. Chrystia Freeland has pointed that out is just highlighting my exact criticism of a government that thinks that saying pretty words is good enough. It's not. Well, there's a whole host of mechanisms. We can have enforcement, which requires that the protections are brought before international laws, that there's accountability measures put in place, that there are penalties in place if they're not followed. Enforcement means making sure we use all the tools available to hold to account any breach in the rights, whether it's workers' rights or the environmental rights. Without any accountability, without any enforceability, what is the point of any law? Laws are meaningless unless there's enforceability. Yeah.
Greg Duggan, Yukon Media. The Liberals have proposed introducing a luxury tax on the purchase of luxury vehicles and boats that would be 10% on the purchase price. You proposed a wealth tax for people with wealth over $20 million. How would you actually determine that someone has $20 million in wealth? And why do you think administering that tax would be better than administering a point-of-sale luxury tax?
So I think, first of all, we're going to take a huge step back. The Liberals talk a lot of talk. They're not going to do anything. They promised a whole bunch of things in 2015. I don't think anyone takes any of their promises seriously. They literally repeatedly promised to make sure the wealthiest pay their fair share. Statistics Canada in 2017, while Mr. Trudeau was government, made it clear that the 1% paid less taxes and earned more wealth. They are not going to do anything about taxing the wealthiest. They've not talked about offshore tax havens, which is a massive part of our plan. They've not talked about asking the wealthiest to pay more. Their plans are actually making the wealthiest pay less and increasing the wealth, increasing the income gap. So I don't take with any credibility their offers. Mr. Trudeau has no credibility on this point. Our plan to put a tax on the super wealthy is based on a number of metrics. One, there would be strict enforcement. It would require self-reporting. There's lots of information we have already publicly available about wealth and net wealth of various people. We would use all the tools available that our CRA has to ensure that those who have wealth of over 20 million pay 1% on their wealth over 20 million. This is a real measure that's going to generate $70 billion according to the PBO over a number of years. This is a massive way to increase revenue, but we're also talking about closing tax loopholes on CEOs, something that Mr. Trudeau promised in 2015, 4 years later has not delivered. Again and again we see Mr. Trudeau says a lot of nice things during a campaign, but has no credibility when it comes to making sure choices are made that benefit people rather than the wealthiest.
And I know you said you don't necessarily trust that he would implement something like that, but do you have any thoughts on the idea of a 10% luxury tax?
I also want to make clear, it's not just me. I mean, Canadians don't have any trust that Mr. Trudeau is going to follow through on what he promises. Many Canadians have come to me and said, you know what, we were really hopeful about Mr. Trudeau. We thought he would be great, but he's broken so many commitments that he made to Canadians, whether it's electoral reform, whether it's defending the environment and then buying a pipeline, whether it's saying that he's going to help out Canadians and giving $14 billion away in the last fall economic statement to the richest corporations while spending 19% less than the Harper government on housing. Again and again, he's broken people's their hopes and made people less and less, more and more cynical. I'm hoping to replace that with some real concrete commitments to making people's lives better. But the idea of looking at luxury goods, I think, is more of a distraction. When we can look at offshore tax havens, which is $23 billion, that's what we need to focus in on. When we can look at CEO stock option loopholes, which would account for about $1 billion of revenue. When we can look at our plan, which would result in $70 billion of revenue according to the Parliamentary Budget Office. Those are real plans to ensure that the wealthiest pay their fair share.
So you said a few times during the campaign that liberal concessions in the new NAFTA deal is going to lead to higher drug prices. But given that's tied to data protection, you haven't actually explained how you would go about solving that problem of there being higher drug prices because of the NAFTA. So what would you actually do about that?
So it's made it harder, absolutely, because Mr. Trudeau made those concessions that are going to drive up the cost of medication. That was a wrong decision to make. That was a concession. That was a worse deal than before. It did not develop a better deal. Not only did drug prices go up, but there's also gaps in the supply management, which hurt farmers. And there was also a lack of protection on environment and labor rights. But what I would do differently in terms of how I could bring down the price of medication is a universal pharmacare program. That is the way we bring down the cost of medication. In fact, we make it free. We use the buying power of our entire nation. Our plan is exactly that. And we put up $10 billion at the federal level, and we deliver a universal pharmacare program, which means that everyone in our country can get access to medication. If you need medication in our country with our plan, you'd use your health card, not your credit card. And that's the way we need to go. That's what all experts are saying we need to go. In fact, the Liberals' own committee that was struck on studying this question said the way to go is a universal, national, single-payer, public pharmacare for all. That's exactly what we're delivering. We're going to do it in 1 year.
So, given your criticisms of the new NAFTA deal and given what the candidate was saying on power politics the other night, would the NDP government actually walk away from the deal? And if so, how would they get the U.S. and Mexico to come back to the table for renegotiation?
Well, the first thing that we would do and what we're making very clear is there's no rush to ratify this deal, particularly when right now in the States, Democrats are working to make those protections that are there just in words, make them enforceable. And so that would be the first step, to ensure that the protections for workers and the protections for the environment are actually enforceable. Once that's achieved, then we can look at what other things can be done. But I certainly would not be rushing to ratify a deal that is not going to protect workers and make things harder instead of easier. Yes? I mean, that's something we've got to look at. It's a real concern that people are now raising given the massive difference in prices between the States and Canada with things like insulin, and that's come up recently. I think our commitment first and foremost has to be to building a universal pharmacare program so that the millions of Canadians who can't afford medication have access to medication. That's our first priority. And then we should do what we can to ensure that there is no risk of that supply for Canadians. We can take those steps. But the first step is to ensure, right now there's millions of Canadians that can't afford their medication. And I've met those people. I've met seniors, I've met families that do not take the medication they need, life-saving medication, because they cannot afford it. That is my first commitment, my first priority is to make sure they get that medication, and then we'll look at other issues as they arise and how we can solve them. My goal is this. I can tell you my values. My goal is to make sure Canadians have access to medication. If there's anything that creates a problem in that access, I will look at solutions for that. But I know that the first thing is, let's not get the cart before the horse. The first problem is, right now, as we stand here, as I stand here on this day, there's millions of Canadians that cannot afford the medication they need. That's my first commitment, to make sure they get it. And the second thing, if there's any concern around accessing that supply, I'll look at solutions. Hi. Oh, awesome. Thank you for the question. Students are having it really tough right now, particularly with the recent cuts brought in by Mr. Ford to OSAP. It's made it even harder for a lot of students to get access to their education. So what I propose are a couple of measures to help out students who are struggling right now. Young people shouldn't be worried, they should be hopeful, and right now they're afraid for the future. So what I want to do first off is, for students that are right now living with student debt, that are feeling the crushing weight of student debt, what Mr. Trudeau has done over the past 4 years has charged students prime plus 3% interest on their debt. That means over the past 4 years, the Liberal government has profited off of student debt to the tune of $3 billion. And just to give you a contrast of choices, while they profited to the tune of $3 billion off of students, Mr. Trudeau forgave $6 billion in corporate loans just last year alone. That to me is completely wrong. That is such a wrong decision to make. What I would do is immediately remove the interest off of federal loans to give students some relief. The second step is I would replace loans with grants and increase access to grants. And ultimately what I want to do is see a future where there's no barriers between kindergarten and career. The kids can go and get their education without any barriers, and that means free tuition. So those are the steps that I'd work on to achieving that. Oui.
Or, vous savez, Québec a 5 de l'ordre traditionnel. Est-ce que vous vous engagez à répondre positivement à ces 5? La société distingue les juges pour la Cour suprême, le droit de veto constitutionnel, le pouvoir de sélection des gouvernements.
Donc, il y a plusieurs enjeux où on se rassemble avec les cours suprêmes, les juges qui sont bilingues. Il y a plusieurs enjeux où déjà là, on a déjà proposé des projets de loi pour régler ces problèmes. En fait, ce que je propose, c'est une injustice historique qu'il faut régler. J'ai le courage de le faire. Je vais mettre mes efforts dès maintenant pour s'attaquer à la crise climatique, de mettre en œuvre la science médicament universelle, d'investir dans le logement abordable. Donc, il y a des enjeux prioritaires de maintenant, mais c'est pour moi une injustice historique qu'il faut régler et j'ai le courage de le faire. Thank you. Merci, thank you. Yes, okay. Okay. Let me say hi to everybody real quick. Hi. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Yeah, for sure. Hi. Nice to meet you. Huh. Nice to meet you.
Sounds great.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Okay, yeah, I'll be able to get a selfie.
Yeah, let's do it. Sure.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
Is that good?
We're gonna walk this way. Come. Let's get yours first. She asked for a quick selfie.
Okay, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Ready? Thank you. Thank you. Can I get one too? Hi. Thank you.
Incredible.
Thank
Glad
you so much.
you came
Thank
out
you.
with that.
Thank you.
Well
Take
done.
care. Eh? See you.
Come to London soon.
I will.